Well, it's so good to see you today. And it's so good to come today before the Lord and just to receive what he has for us. You're not here for what I can give you today. You're here for what God wants to do in your life. And all of us as the church, as we gather, we're just vessels by which his goodness just manifests in our lives in different, unexpected ways. And we've been in a series of messages called Dream Again. Turn to somebody and say, it's time to dream again. Look at me and just say, it's time to dream again. Time to dream again. The world won't tell you that. The world says it's time to fear again, and media and everything else, time to fear again, time to be afraid. But we know that what God is calling us to do in this season is to dream again. And recently, maybe a lot of you know, but maybe some of you don't. So my family has been through a pretty crazy season. My wife is battling brain cancer. And so we are just in this season of, really leaning on the Lord and trusting his goodness. And as you can imagine, that kind of makes our life just like this roller coaster. And I've never longed more for consistency or a rhythm in my life that I'm longing for right now. And yet I noticed as our weeks are all different and crazy, and there's so much going on with the treatments, and obviously we're still leading a church through a pandemic and all that entails. And then we've got 3 small kids, 5, 3, and 1, and just all normal life stuff. I mean, it's a pretty crazy time. And but what we've been longing for recently is consistency. And what I notice is, because every week feels crazy and different, like you wake up and you never know what's going to happen. It's what it feels like. But I noticed something interesting that in all the inconsistency in this whole time for us, I've noticed that like Sunday morning is always good for us. Sunday morning is always good. And for us, recently, as we've gotten reconnected, Thursday night is always good, because Thursday night is when we have our small group here at the church. We're in the Hawkins small group here in Oak Forest. And Thursday night's always good. And what I mean by that is we never walk away from Sunday morning or Thursday night being like, man, that stunk, or that didn't add value to my life. Now, I don't often know what Monday morning is going to be like, what Thursday morning is going to be like, what Tuesday evening is going to be like. Like, those are all over the place, but there's just something about the Sunday morning rhythm and the Thursday night when we go to our group that I'm like, man, like those, I look forward to those consistently because they're always good for my soul and good for my family. And of course, I ask the question, well, why is that? And how can I translate that into every part of my week? And the answer is pretty obvious, is because those are the moments that our family has set aside to gather with the church regularly, and they are atmospheres connected to Jesus and his people. And so when we get to those places, even when life is hard, and even when things don't go as planned, there's something where, like, whenever we get with the people of God, focus on the things of God, it's good. And it's good for us. Like the song said, you are good, you are good. And I say this a lot, but it's very meaningful to me that I've noticed in all my years of being a pastor that no one has ever come into my office and said that their life is falling apart because they're following Jesus too closely. It's never happened, right? Never like, I just been praying too much and I'm anxious, I've just been serving too many people and feeding too many homeless people. I've just been giving too much of my money away to the church or to people in need. I just been going to church too much and it's ruining my life. Never one time. It's always the opposite. I'm doing the stuff that God clearly in his word says not to do. And I know he still loves me, but I keep doing these things, and I got problems in my life. And what that shows me is that God is just like really good and his ways are good. It doesn't mean that your life is perfect, but it means that even in the hard times, like there's goodness for God in you, that he is good for your life. And I believe that anyone that truly comes to the Lord, like it says in Psalm 34, taste and see that the Lord is good. So come and see, come try this out. Come try his ways, come live his life, come do what he says, and taste and see that it is good for you and for your life. And my question today for those of you who have tasted that to some degree in your life is, why wouldn't we want that in all of our life? Like, if he's good, why wouldn't we want that in every single aspect of our life? If he's good, if he produces fruit, if it blesses us, if God brings us peace, why wouldn't we want that in all of our life? Why do we stand disconnected from him in different parts of our life and then complain about a lack of peace or a lack of purpose? And today what I want to do as we continue our series called Dream Again is I want you to dream about what your relationship with God could be. Just take a morning to dream for a moment. Not what your relationship with God is, what it could be. That's what I want to think about. Not how it has been, what it was like in the past when you were growing up, or even what it was like last week. What your walk with God could be. I want us to dream about that today because the culture that we live in is divided, it's lonely, there's mental health problems, there's pessimism. I mean, it's just like the stream of the culture is not producing super healthy, well-adjusted people that are full of peace. It's not producing that. And yet God invites us to dream again about the life that we could have in spite of the culture, in spite of the issues, by fully connecting to him and walking with him and seeing what he could do in our lives. We have a moment today, a sacred moment in this room, to dream again about our connection to Jesus and what it could do in our life, what your life could be in Christ, and what God could do in your life moving forward. Jesus invites us into this today. If you have a Bible, turn me to John chapter 15. That's where we're going to be, John 15, starting in verse 1. And while you're turning there, John 15, I'm going to be reading out of the English Standard Version here in a moment. Give you a little bit of context. In this moment, Jesus is heading to the cross, and he launches in between John 14 and John 17 into just some of the most sacred and divine words that you can find. They're powerful. It's Jesus just like downloading so much compact heavenly wisdom to his followers before he's going to go to the cross and die. And he's not going to really be with them and around them as much as like he used to. There's a big transition that's coming. And so he gives them these words that they would not only have peace in the moment, but that the rest of their life and their calling, that they would thrive and become the people that they're actually supposed to be. He gives them these parting words because they need it, because they'll be tempted to not do these things. And he uses a beautiful image of a vine and a vine dresser and the branches of the vine that compel us to live out our life walking with Jesus to the fullness of what it could be. So this time, would you stand with me? We love to stand in the honor of reading God's word together. John 15, verses 1 through 11. I'm going to read this for us. If you don't have a Bible, it'll be up on the screen behind me. Jesus speaking to his disciples, he says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. And the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. May God bless the reading of his word. You can be seated. So this past week, I got like the worst food poisoning I've ever gotten in my entire life. It was awful. Thankfully, it was right after church. I preached last Sunday, went home, and ate some leftovers at what used to be my favorite restaurant. Um, and I had a really rough couple of days. And in case you're wondering, it's not Pollo Loco, don't worry. It's my favorite fast food restaurant, my other favorite restaurant that's not a fast food restaurant. I won't tell you the name because, I don't want to disparage them, but it was pretty rough. The only redeeming part of it, though, was I got to do something that I absolutely love to do, but I don't often get to do. It was like Monday, I was recovering, very weak. I was past the storm, but I was still recovering. And for some reason, all the kids were at school, and everybody was gone from the house. And I had a rare moment of the house to myself. And I got to do one of my favorite things that I so rarely get to do these days, was I got to kick back on the couch in a quiet house, and I got to watch a documentary. I love documentaries. I love history. My family hates documentaries, and so we never watch it together. And so I watched this documentary, and it was fascinating because, I'm kind of kicking back on Amazon Prime, seeing what we got. And there was this, I think it's called like a docudrama, where it's like a documentary, but it's also like they give characters, and it's kind of a drama too. And it was on the American West post the Civil War. And I mean, it was just this fascinating documentary of how the western part of what is now the United States got settled in the late 1800s post the Civil War. And I learned a lot during the documentary that I didn't know. And I love the Civil War, but I never really studied much kind of after the Civil War and kind of what happened. And one of the issues is obviously once the South was defeated, they kept trying to kind of come back and start the war again. And Ulysses S. Grant, who was the new president post the Civil War, one of his big things he was trying to figure out was how do I keep the South from kind of rising up again, because they keep attacking us with different militias. How do I kind of keep them from attacking us again? And what he realized eventually was that the problem wasn't so much that we had to kind of defeat this enemy, but he kind of went below the surface as to kind of why is this happening? Why do these people keep trying to start this war? Because we don't want this war to restart. And what he realized was that when you think about it, in the South, after they had lost the war, they had no hope. They were defeated, and where they lived was decimated. They were just in a really hopeless, not good place. And so his solution to what was going on was essentially to say, listen, what if we found a way to give them hope? What if we found a way to give them a new start? They'd stop trying to restart the war, and maybe we could even use their desire to make something of themselves and their life productive for the United States. And so what they did was they basically involved former Confederate soldiers into what was called the Homestead Act in the late 1800s, which was available for the Northerners, but now also for the Southerners, where basically, and this is kind of crazy, if you would go out to the Western United States, because back then, America was just on the east side, right? If you'll go out towards what is now Colorado and California and all these other places, what we will do for you is we will give you up to 160 acres of free land, all yours, totally free. But you got to get out there, which is not easy back then, right? There's no Expedia, no planes, no Buc-ee's along the way, right? You got to go out there, and then also you have to cultivate that land. You have to make something of it. And it was fascinating to watch all of these stories, and they gave a lot of individual stories of people who literally would sell everything where they were at, pack up their entire family, and head out west with no guarantee that it would go well, with no guarantee they would even survive the journey to get there. And they would go out west simply because it provided some hope. And what was fascinating about this and so compelling was it was such an all-in kind of thing. Today we do a thing, we're like, we'll try something. If it doesn't work, we'll just give up and come back to the former thing. That's how we do things, right? We have a non-committal, let's kind of see how this goes generation. I'll put all my eggs in 20 baskets. That's kind of how we live our life. And to watch these people who literally said, listen, we're selling everything, we're burning the ship, and we won't be returning. It awakens something in us when we watch stories like that, because I believe that we are created to be all in people. And the message of Jesus in John 15 is just that. And I want to be careful today, because if I don't help really explain the depth of what he's saying in this moment to you, you might be tempted to think, oh, this is a really cute verse and some really cute imagery of like the vine and the branch and, abide in me and I in you, and let's put it in the nursery with the baby because it's cute and it fits the theme of the greenery that we have, and the theme is green, it's cute, and oh, how comforting, like to abide in Jesus. And listen, like it is comforting and that's a good thing, but when Jesus says this, he's basically saying, give me all of your life and be fully in with me if you want to produce fruit in this life and if you want to have joy. It's like in Matthew 4 when he comes to the disciples and he says, come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. And at once they left their nets and they followed him. They weren't just following him for a day, like chillaxing with Jesus around the town to see what it was like. It was like they dropped their nets and they followed him. That literally meant they gave their life to him. Or in Luke 14, when it says, now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned to them and he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So there's people that are following him, and he's trying to get them to go away because they don't understand. This is an all-in kind of thing. This is not just a show. I'm not just performing miracles. Like you have to love me so much that to the degree that like you would disregard everything else for my sake. And so often the problem is we just kind of water down that message over time, and then we wonder why we get an apathetic church, and we wonder why the church isn't the light and why the church isn't shining in the world. And so my question today is, do we really want to have a life that is totally transformed and produces eternal fruit and joy that will never end? Do you really want that? Like, for real, do you want that? Or do we just kind of want a nice, pretty, safe little life? Maybe one day get married, have a couple kids, make some money, get a promotion, retire, see some grandkids, and die. Like, what do we really want? If you want something safe and small and that doesn't really last or make a difference, or it's just all about you, then these words of Jesus are not for you today. They can be for you. Anybody can have this, but Jesus says, come follow me. And so I say that because I want us to look at verse 4, and let's read that again, because that's what he's saying here. Verse 4, he says, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. You see, Jesus calls us to abide, but that's a weird word for us in our world. We don't know what that means. What does it mean to abide? We don't say that in our normal, everyday, American, language. Hey man, you want to come abide with me? We don't say that, You don't text somebody, hey, you up for abiding today? Come abide with me. It'd be kind of cool, but we don't say that. So what does this word mean if we're going to understand what he's saying? And what it means is that to abide with Jesus is to be fully connected to him in all of life. That's what it means. To abide with Jesus is to be fully connected to him in all of life. In the original language, that word abide means to remain, to stay, or to be fully connected. So to be fully connected to Jesus in every single part of your life. And so it means that we don't have a partial connection to Jesus. We don't have a loose connection to Jesus. That we're not like connected to Jesus, but also connected to a whole other lot of things that our culture wants us to be connected to. So we're not like deeply connected in our heart and in our spirit to like how much money's in the bank. We're not deeply connected to the ideologies and the movements that are around us and the politics and all these other things that are happening in the world. We're not deeply connected to what people think about us. We're not deeply connected to achieving some like life goal. Like we're fully and deeply connected to Jesus. And we do all these other things, and we're a part of all these other things, but all those other things flow out of our relationship with Jesus because He is the vine, and we are the branches. That abiding with Jesus means having a close personal relationship with him, of which then becomes the lens that informs everything else in your life. And Jesus says, this is the path to fruit, and this is the path to joy. And in our day and age, this is something we have to really foster and cultivate, because we live, like, think about this, you live in the most distracted time probably in human history. There's never been more access to everything at any time, any place. You can talk to any person, anywhere. They can be in China, you can Zoom, whatever. I mean, you just have so much access. And I keep telling these kids all the time that there was a time before Spotify, and I remember that time before Spotify, okay? I keep telling these kids, and I talk to kids these days, you know, like, I'm sounding like the old man, like, the kids these days, you know, and I'm like, what band do you like? What artist do you like, you know? And like, they always give me like, either they can't give me like a name, or it's like a bunch of like, well, I like everything. That's what people, I like all kinds of stuff. I'm like, it's kind of cool. I like the diversity. You can go different. That's cool, you know? But I'm like, when I was coming up, like when I was coming up before like Spotify, now my generation did develop the stealing music illegally online thing. And so, you know, that was part of it. But I also remember a time before that too, where all we had was like CDs. And I remember when you would go to the store, when you would buy a CD, you were all in, because this was the CD you were gonna buy, and these were the 12 songs that you were gonna listen to over and over and over and over and over again. Can I get a witness? That's how it was. I remember when my dad, he had a truck, he got the 6 CD player. It's like, you could play 6 CDs in your car. It's like, what's 6 times 12? It's like 70 something songs. It's amazing. How could we ever listen to 70 different songs? Because back then you'd buy a CD and like you had to really pick. It was a commitment. What's it gonna be? Like Puddle of Mud? You know, Nelly, Destiny's Child, Avril, Blink, Sum 41, what's it gonna be? Because you can't buy them all. And remember, you would buy that one CD and you would put it in your one CD player, and you would listen over and over and over, and you would build a really strong connection to those songs, because back then, it was all you had, so you would listen to every song, and you begin to like them all eventually. You would listen to the 9th track on the CD. Nobody ever listens to the 9th track on the CD, but you did, and you bought it first for the first couple of songs that you liked, but then all the other songs, over time, they grew on you. Like, I didn't like it at first, but I get what they're doing now. And sometimes, you remember, you would get like, you would buy the wrong CD. Like, I'll tell you this, I will tell you the single worst CD I ever bought, the biggest ripoff, was the All-American Rejects self-titled debut album. It was garbage, okay? I like Swing Swing. It was the one hit song, but I was like, they got me. All these songs are trash, you know? But you were stuck with it, so I listened to it anyway. And then I like gave it to my sister or something, or I said, use it like a coaster or something, you know, because I'm not gonna be listening to this. But you build a connection, and then you'd go see him live in concert, and you would just know all the songs so deeply and so well. And that's the hard part of the world today, is the options are great, but what we lose a lot of times is the deep level of connection, whether it's with people or whether it's with church. I mean, like, you can foster a really deep connection with your church community if you have the time and the commitment, and everything's not always constantly competing with it. And the same is true with Jesus. Like, when he's talking about abiding with him, he's talking about, like, man, this really deep, all-in connection with him. Fully connected. I mean, think about it literally, like the branch to the vine. That's the kind of, like that's the imagery that Jesus gives. I mean, you're fully connected. And what would change in your life if your focus was to invite Jesus into every part of your life? Think about this, just guess. You think your life would get better or worse? Do you think if you were all in on Jesus, you would cultivate a life of a greater legacy or less of a legacy? I think it's so obvious. Like we know that he's so good for us, and we know that his ways are good. Yet the problem is so often we kind of allow for a shallow connection to him. In verse 10, I love this. I think this is very helpful in our day. He says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. If you're taking notes, maybe write this down. Commandments protect connections. A lot of times people don't understand the commands of Scripture or maybe like the moral ethics of the Christian worldview, because they don't understand that it's all designed to facilitate a relationship. And so people think like, they read the 10 Commandments or something, or different commandments in the Bible, and they're like, those are the religious rules of the Bible, and that's what we got to do, because that's what God says, like this is like, do what the man says, this is the rules, and do them. If you make a mistake, you're out. If you do them, you're in. Like it's all these like religious rules, and what we forget out of the context is that all of these commandments are ultimately given to facilitate a relationship. And so like in the beginning, Genesis 1, God creates the world. Genesis 3, Adam and Eve sin against God. They rebel. Sin enters the world. The world becomes full, and with all this sin, it's corrupt and it's evil, and there's wars and there's selfishness, and it's just this really corrupt place. And then God calls Abraham to create a family which becomes the nation Israel. And he says, Abraham, like basically, you're going to create a great nation, and it's going to be a light to the world. And so God begins to form a people called Israel to be a light to the world. But here's what we forget. In the ancient times, Israel had no idea how to be the light of the world, because they had the same sin and like selfish, evil impulses like everybody did. Like, you stole from me, I kill you. Like that was just kind of the way the world was, right? Or you steal from me, and I'm gonna take your sheep, whatever it is. Like that was just the way it was like dog eat dog. I said all these impulses, and so God begins to give his people the commandments, specifically the 10 Commandments. He said, listen, this is the way that you can be the light and create a culture in society that flourishes. Because like we want to be the light, but we don't know how to be the light. Like I don't like that guy, And so what do I do about that? Or we're tempted to use the Lord's name in vain, and we're breaking our relationship with God. And so God gives the 10 Commandments, but when you see the 10 Commandments, what you realize is what the commandments do is they protect our relationship with God and our relationship with people. And so have no other gods before me. Keep the Sabbath holy, the 10 Commandments, like protecting your walk with God. Like don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, protecting your relationship with people. And so commandments protect connections. And so when Jesus says, if you will keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, what he says is like, listen, my commandments and the things that I call you to do are the things that help you to facilitate the life that has this level of abiding that produces fruit in your life. And all of us have commandments or maybe rules that maybe we don't understand, or maybe even as we read the Bible, like, I don't know if I agree with that. But as we begin to trust God with the good things that he has done in our life and the things that we do understand over time, it begins to grow in your life, and you begin to be able to trust God maybe even when you don't understand it. Because he's been good to us, and he's given us good things. And so I want you to dream about your relationship with God and how wonderful it could be that, what would it look like if every decision you made in your life was just full of so much peace because you laid it before God, you prayed about it, you trusted him, and you moved forward? What would your marriage look like? What would your singleness look like? What could God do in your life? But then in verse 5, he talks about what happens whenever we do not abide with him. Verse 5, for apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. And when the branches are gathered, they're thrown into the fire and they're burned. And so he teaches us that whenever we don't abide in Jesus, we wither over time. And that over time part, and understanding what he's saying here is really, really important, because think about this. If this was just so blatantly obvious, everybody would do it. Nobody wants to wither in their life. Nobody wants to end up in a bad situation. People don't wake up one day deciding to ruin their lives or do a big thing. It just kind of happens over time. We just kind of wander into these things. And if we're honest, it seems kind of radical that we say that, wait, so you're saying if I don't abide in Jesus, that my life will wither over time? And the answer is, well, that's what Jesus says. And probably you're wondering, hey, but I know some people that they have nothing to do with Jesus, and their lives are okay. They've got a family or they've got a job and they seem decently happy and, like they seem fine. And the answer is yes, for now. And in my shoes as a pastor, I get to see this uniquely because I just have so many stories I can tell you of people who didn't realize they needed God until they realized they needed God. And I've been in so many situations. I grew up in this area, and a lot of people I knew growing up didn't go to church, weren't connected. And so whenever somebody would get married or there'd be a funeral, I would get a phone call because I don't know a pastor, but this guy I knew growing up as a pastor, so you should call him, And so I'm always doing all these different events because people would get these big moments in life and they'd realize, wow, my secular, simple life has no framework for death, has no framework for the importance of marriage, or no framework for how to handle the big things of life. It's fun when I just am doing hobbies and working my job and doing stuff, but everybody comes to the crossroads where all of a sudden it's really silly to not have God in your life. And people that they don't realize that you can live your life. There was one family that I knew growing up, and they were just standard family and did stuff and vacations and summer and things like that. And then one day their 28-year-old son has too much to drink, gets on a motorcycle, dies. And I get the call, and I'm sitting here talking to the mom, and it's this really confusing moment, and my heart just goes out for her because she's grieving, and we're planning the funeral, and she's like, I want it to be in church, and I want to have the hope of God, but she's like, but don't say too much spiritual stuff, and don't be too Bible-y because, we're not really all that, we're not really, we like Jesus, but we're not super into Jesus. And I'm sitting here and I feel bad for her, but it's so confusing. She's like, well, I want the hope, but don't talk too much about Jesus. And she just didn't know what to say. And my hope is just that we don't put ourselves or our family in those same situations to have those confusing things where we have to just make up things at the end because we just never really thought about the reality that one day everybody would die. That your life should have just as much theology and just as much wisdom for your last day as it does for your current day. And when we don't abide in Jesus, we wither over time. Another example of this is, I always love doing this when I preach on this passage. I brought this from my house. I grew this. This is a real vine. I grew this, okay? I'll be honest, every time people come to my house in my backyard, I get tons of comments of people that love my vine. It's all over my backyard. It's amazing. I love it. The winter freeze killed it, and it came back, resurrection, new life. I love it. But it's crazy because it's funny, this illustration, the image that Jesus gives actually answers this. Well, it seems okay to not abide in Jesus and not walk with God. What's the big deal? It seems okay. And it's this looks fine right now, doesn't it? Looks good. Plucked it yesterday. A lot of green, looks normal, could never tell the difference, but as you can see, I've pulled it from the vine. And looks good now, but in a year from now, what's this going to look like? And that's the problem that all of us have. And I would even argue that in the ways in which we don't think that we need God or it's not that big of a deal, it's funny, that's only because God has actually blessed us abundantly. And how crazy it is that because God has blessed us and maybe God has given us a smooth life in a lot of ways, just simply we didn't create that. He gave that to us, but we use that to then not seek him. How crazy is that? You see, what really matters in your life is what happens in the end, what you produce. It's not just how you feel in the moment or how you start. Everybody can start. I have this thing, and I'm going to start making a petition. My theory is, it's funny, whenever someone gets married, and listen, we did this. Whenever someone gets married, we have the big celebration, right? Book the venue, invite all the guests, and, daddy or someone's paying $20,000 and it's big and it's exciting and we're celebrating and we're getting married and it's all awesome. It's so fun, And it's no offense, what are we celebrating? My theory is we should have the celebration after 10 years of marriage. Amen? Then get everybody together. Woohoo, we made it. This is a miracle. This is worthy of celebrating. Versus massive celebration. We've done nothing. nothing yet. We've been married for 0 days. For real, we're like, yay, it's awesome. And you know the statistics? This is scary. We're all trying to act like the statistics don't say what they say. Same thing like your job, like someone gets a new job, it's like, yay. It's like, and Frank's been grinding for 20 years in HR, and no one says anything to that man. And it's like, my life is fine right now. It's good. Doing great. But what about in the end? What does it mean in the end? What does it produce in the end? When Jesus says you will produce fruit, he's talking about eternal things. Because if it goes away, it's not real fruit. That's why Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. He's meaning nothing of eternal significance that actually lasts. I was talking to my wife. My wife is, obviously fighting her battle, and we were talking yesterday about, she's like, I think I want to sign up for another marathon. My wife runs marathons. She's run multiple marathons. I've run 0 marathons. And we were talking, and I was thinking something pretty interesting. I was like, what's interesting? Like right now in this room, all of us, 100% of us most likely, we could all start a marathon. Maybe 3 of us could finish a marathon. Raise your hand if you think you could finish a marathon. Be honest. Okay, 6. We have a fit church. Okay, like 7 people. Okay, we have 7 people that can finish a marathon. They say they could finish a marathon. Okay, 7 people, right? I can't fit. Raise your hand if you could start a marathon. Raise your hand. Yeah, we could all. Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. And that's what Jesus is saying here. And then we come to the last few verses. He says, because here's a problem, I think. And I've done this long enough to know this is, because I felt this too. Like, when Jesus says to come abide with him, maybe deep down our fear is, but I got a lot to do, busy, and like, I want to do something great with my life. I don't just want to be this kind of hermit, removed from everything, just kind of with a spiritual relationship. I see the value in that, but I also want to do some great things in this world with the time that I've been given. Like, I'm afraid that if I abide, that maybe like I can't do a lot of these things. And yet what's interesting is that, look at verse 5. He says, whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. So the reality is no, actually when we abide with Jesus, we produce much fruit. The same way there's this like radical thing where he says, if you don't abide in me, you wither. He also says this radical thing. This is the words of Jesus. These are not my words. These are his words. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Then go on to verse 8. He says, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. So Jesus is wanting you to produce much fruit with your life and to do great things. And I would even say God wants you to be successful. And whatever that calling is for your life, success is not a dirty word if we define it rightly. God wants you to be successful in your life and to produce fruit in the things that he has called you to do. And so our desire to do great things and abiding with Jesus are not at odds. Your desire to do great things was given to you by God himself. And God wants to do that through you. But the way that you do that is you abide in him, because if you don't abide in him, what's going to happen is you might do a lot of things to where you're too overloaded, or you might do a few things, you might accomplish a few things, but they aren't really of eternal significance. And so Jesus says, no, listen, if you abide with me, if you live fully connected to me in every single part of your life, if you allow me to be the lens by which you see everything, and if you remain in my commandments, and if you draw near to me, that you will produce much fruit in your life. So you don't have to leave your walk with Jesus behind and neglect that so you can run over here and try and do a bunch of things with your life, because the wonder is these things are actually meant to go together. You see, when we are fully connected to Jesus, we actually produce more fruit. Number one, because we're not as distracted. When you have a deep relationship with Jesus, you get a lot more clarity on what you're supposed to do in life. It's funny, when we say things like, I'm too busy to pray, I'm too busy to have a quiet time, or too busy to go to church, like I always envision it's like the stats where they talk about people that say they work 40 hours a week. You should look this up. It's like people say they work 40 hours. What that means is we work 18 hours a week. Like when you really add it up, like we might be at work 40 hours a week. We might be sitting at our desk 40 hours a week, but like they're like on average, like that really translates to 18 hours. They're like, y'all, 40 hours is a long time. Try to go pray for 10 minutes straight. And you'll be like, 40 hours is a long time. And so like you could do a bajillion things at your job if you were just focused for 40 hours. The problem is what? We get distracted, right? But when we're fully connected to Jesus, we produce more fruit. When we're connected to Jesus, we can say no to lesser things. When we're connected to Jesus, we experience his joy and his purpose, so we work better. And when we're connected to Jesus, here's the cool thing is like anything we do can produce spiritual fruit. This is not just like the super spiritual things that we might see, like going to church or reading the Bible, having a quiet time. It can be your secular job. It can be raising the kids. It can be anything that you can do. It can even be a hobby, because you can be a light anywhere that you go. The reality, though, is just that we are connecting those things to Jesus. And most importantly, what Jesus will do is he will direct us to the things that actually last. I was kind of blown away by this because, no matter what you believe, like this is actually true. Like Jesus is speaking to his disciples and they're going to go on to found the church. And like, here we are today. I love that. I was looking up different stories of different like companies, and it's just so funny. I remember, speaking of old school in the 90s, this is like 90s Sunday. Remember Blockbuster back in the day? When I was coming up, man, Blockbuster was like everything. It was like the epitome of success. Like who was more successful than Blockbuster? Long before Starbucks, long before all that kind of stuff, like no Amazon, Blockbuster. I looked this up. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster consisted of over 9,000 stores, employed over 84,000 people across 2 different countries. And 6 years later in 2010, they filed for bankruptcy. And that's the world that we live in. And yet Jesus here is talking to his church 80 generations ago and saying, if you will abide in me and I in you, you will produce much fruit. Blockbuster lasted 1 generation. When you abide with Jesus, you build something that lasts. And so as we draw to a close, I want you to really begin to dream again about what your connection to Jesus could look like. Once again, not what it's been, but what it ultimately could be. And I want us to dream about what we could do. I want us to dream about this church. Like, what could God do through us? Like, let's be honest. Like, when we gather together here at New Day today, like, what are we thinking? Like, what do we think God's going to do in this place? Do we have big dreams for what he's doing? Like, it's so funny. I always like think of like the church in Acts. Like if you're new to the Bible, the book of Acts is like the story of the early church. And like the church, like we come together and we want to be like them, and we want to use them as our model because it's kind of God's guidance for what the church should look like. And I always ask myself this question. I'm like, was the church in Acts a neighborhood church? And it's kind of an interesting question to ask, isn't it? Because maybe in some ways they were, but even if they were just a nice little neighborhood church, they were a neighborhood church with a big vision to go to the ends of the earth. And they were planting churches, and they were sending people out, and they were praying big prayers. It wasn't just like, oh, we're just here, and it's small, and it's just us, and we're good. And yeah, like if that's what they had been doing, we wouldn't be here today. But that they were convinced that as they were abiding with Jesus, that God was going to do great things through them. And my question for our church as New Day is what do we think God's going to do in our church in the next 20 years? When we think of 20 years from now, what do we see? And do we have a mindset of faith? Do we really believe that as we abide with Jesus, that he will produce much fruit? Or are we selling ourselves short as a church? And I want to ask the same thing about your life. When you think of your life 10 years from now, what do you see? When you look 10 years into the future, what do you see? Do you see yourself just hanging in there? 10 years from now, what do you envision your prayer life being like? 10 years from now, how much of the Bible do you know? 10 years from now, are you still dealing with that same sin that no one knows about? 10 years from now, what kind of father are you? What kind of mother are you? Like, as you abide with Jesus, as you lean into him, can you see what he could do through your life? Are you dreaming again, or are you just allowing the pessimism of the world or your own past to limit where you think you're going? The Bible is just full of story after story after story of an ordinary person with an extraordinary faith and a full-out surrender to God that God blessed in their time to do something great. May we not be normal. Everyone in the world is just hanging in there, just hanging on right now. But with the mindset of just hanging on, all you're ever going to be doing is hanging on. Always busy. Always saying, I'm busy. Can't get to the prayer time because I'm too busy. But is it possible if we would take a step back from everything and say, if I do one thing with my life, I will know Jesus. And I might not go to every party, and my kids might not play every single sport. I might not have a ton of hobbies. I may not even have a ton of friends. But if I do one thing, I'll know Jesus very, very well. And if I can put all my eggs into one basket, because deep down we're all putting our eggs into one basket, it's going to be Jesus. And I'm going to have faith that everything else works out. And I'm going to leave you with this. This week, as I'm working on this, I always feel a conviction of like, I don't just want to get up here and say these things. And it's been a busy season for us, and my wife's battling brain cancer, and our schedule's crazy, and I've got 3 small kids and a church in a pandemic, and I'm constantly feeling overwhelmed, like I can't get it all done. I feel behind. I feel all those things. And just weak, just feeling weak constantly in every single way you can imagine. And it was Wednesday, and one thing you might not know is even as a pastor, it can be hard to have a quiet time. Like, I wish I would tell you every day I'm up at 5 a.m. on my knees just like before the Father. I'm not, I'm just like you. And it was Wednesday, and I just had the sense where God was like, you need to really get with me tomorrow. And I was like, God was speaking, you need to get with me tomorrow. And so the next day I woke up, honestly, a little bit excited, did some stuff, and then I created a window to be with him just 45 minutes. Made a simple prayer list, and I just kind of started praying. First 5 minutes, mind's wandering, distracted, all over the place, can't focus like normal, and I kept praying. And what you will notice is, the problem is if you try to pray for 10 minutes and you give up, what you often miss is there's a moment in prayer where you break through. And if you've ever been there, you know it. You break through the wall. And y'all, I broke through the wall 10 minutes in. And I told my community group this on Thursday, so I'm not making this up. I had the single greatest moment of prayer of my entire life 3 days ago. I was crying. I was pouring my heart out to God. He was like speaking things to me. He was giving me like visions of things he was going to do in my life. I mean, I was in a truly spiritual experience. And for me, it was just confirmation that, man, when you abide with Jesus, he will do wonders in your life. And I've been working so hard the last 2 months and managing all the bills and all the appointments and all the meetings and all the sermons and all the team. And I'm managing, I'm working, I'm trying to get better at my schedule and time block more effectively and budget. I'm doing all these things, and I get alone for 45 minutes, and I'm like, I can do all this. My life is a piece of cake. And I want that for you. And that's what you find when you abide in Jesus. And so I want to encourage you this week to do this. 1 hour. Listen, you can take all the 167 other hours and you can work your butt off. Go for it. But just give them 1 focused hour this week. And silence every distraction. And see what he does in you in that 1 hour. And compare it to the 167 hours when you were working so hard to get everything done. And then you tell me where your life and where your fruit will come from. And begin to dream again about what he could do in your life. Give him 1 hour this week. And focus, and you'll be distracted, and push through the wall. Have your Bible open. Have a journal ready to write down the things that you think he's speaking to you. And see what he does in your life. And see if it doesn't transform everything in your life. Because I know that it will.